Ah, finally they confessed. Not in whispers, not in the shadows where secrets usually crawl and hide, not in a corner where no one could hear the edges of their guilt. They confessed openly, with a weight in their voice that seemed too heavy for their frame, like it had been packed away for years and only just now erupted. You had waited for this moment longer than you realized, and yet, when it came, it was nothing like you imagined. The confession didn't feel like closure. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like an explosion, scattering the pieces of your life in directions you hadn't accounted for. Every word they said landed, not on the surface, but deep where memory and instinct had built their quiet defenses. You felt it in the quietest part of your being, that recognition of betrayal that doesn't need confirmation. It knows itself already. But the acknowledgement makes it real, unavoidable, tangible. No one else seemed to understand what had shifted. They heard the confession, nodded, maybe even murmured polite things about consequences or accountability, but they didn't feel it. You noticed it immediately. Their gaze was flat. Their bodies were static. Their minds were still running old loops, still trying to fit this event into the narratives they preferred, the ones where comfort exists, where understandings is safe. They didn't yet see the tremors. They didn't yet see how the confession reshaped every interaction that had ever existed between you and the world. And that's the thing. Some revelations aren't for everyone. Some truths don't land evenly. Some truths burn fastest in the ones who had no idea the fire was waiting. You remembered every detail of what had led here. The subtle manipulations, the words unsaid, the way things were slightly off but never alarming enough to call attention to. The casual cruelty, hidden in gestures, smiles, or moments that seemed inconsequential at the time, but weren't. They had relied on invisibility, on the assumption that no one notices until too late, that small acts accumulate into a force only recognizable when it's already over. And you had noticed. You had always noticed. But noticing isn't the same as acting. You had acted when it mattered, in the ways you were allowed. And now, the confession, the outright revelation of what they had done, felt like a delayed reckoning, like an echo finally reaching you after years of bouncing around walls you didn't know were there. The night it happened, you didn't react the way they expected. There was no visible upheaval, no dramatic exposure, no immediate confrontation. That would have been too easy for them, too simple, and they had built their lives on simplicity in your absence. You stood in the room, listening, allowing each sentence to land in the spaces between your thoughts, and you realized something they could never have anticipated. They had admitted everything, but it had not changed the power dynamic. It had merely revealed it, and that revelation was a weapon. Not a weapon for destruction, necessarily. Not in the immediate sense, but a weapon for understanding, for preparation, for the subtle unraveling of certainty in those who believed they had already won. You didn't speak. You didn't have to. The silence you carried, the calm you projected, it did more than words could. Because they were searching, instinctively, for a reaction that would justify their existence, and you didn't provide it. That was the first wound. Invisible, yet potent. The following morning, the world seemed different. People who had been complicit, even tangentially, in the things that were confessed, shifted unconsciously. There were glances that lingered too long, conversations that cut off suddenly, and attention that no one could articulate. The confession had traveled beyond its origin, as confessions always do. It had seeped into the places where people thought no one would ever look, It had touched the corners where accountability had been conveniently ignored. And even as they pretended ignorance, you saw it reflected in the smallest details. The way doors were closed more gently, the way eyes flicked toward you when words were spoken. You felt the tremor, not because they admitted anything to you, but because the truth had slipped into collective awareness. That kind of awareness is infectious. That kind of awareness unsettles even those who were convinced of their moral and social balance. And that was when you understood the second part. The confession was never meant for reconciliation. It was meant for disruption. You recalled the moment of confession over and over, not because you wanted to relive it, but because it was a map. Each syllable they had uttered was a direction, a coordinate in the landscape they had shaped. And you traced the lines back, connecting the dots between the past incidents, the patterns, the almost invisible threads of influence and manipulation. You realized that the confession didn't merely validate your perception, it illuminated it. Everything you had felt, suspected, and endured became undeniable. It was there in black and white, in sound and articulation. And suddenly, the rules shifted. You weren't operating in the absence of knowledge anymore. You were operating with clarity, with the weapon of awareness. That clarity changes everything. It changes posture, it changes decisions, it changes the spaces you occupy because you now carry a weight that isn't seen but is profoundly understood. Others couldn't see the layers of this change. They reacted as though the confession was a moment, a finite event, a checkbox on a moral ledger. But you understood it as a process, a slow-burning rearrangement of reality itself. Each human interaction now carried the residue of the admission. Every conversation was shaded by it. Every meeting, every handshake, every seemingly casual exchange was now informed by knowledge that could not be undone. And that's the insidious strength of confession. It is not the act of admitting itself that matters, but the persistent influence it leaves in its wake. Even when people try to ignore it, it operates below the surface, shaping perception, informing instinct, guiding behavior, without declaration. You saw it in them. You saw the tiny hesitations, the sudden recalculations, the unsteady assumptions. They couldn't help themselves. That is the power you now held, quietly, invisibly, without acting, without forcing acknowledgement, just existing with the understanding that they had finally shown their hand. There were memories you could no longer escape, faces, phrases, actions that had once been blurred by time or rationalized away now crystallized. You remembered the laughter that followed slight injustices, the casual dismissal of your presence, the way trust had been assumed and abused. They had confessed, but what they didn't confess was how they believed you would respond, how fragile the illusion of normalcy truly was. They thought the acknowledgement would relieve them of responsibility, that it would close a chapter neatly, and they underestimated what happens when someone truly understands the depth of what was done to them. You weren't interested in revenge, not yet. You were interested in recognition, in comprehension, in the quiet recalibration of everything that had been skewed. And when comprehension is silent, it's more potent. It doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't demand acknowledgement. It simply exists. And when it exists in someone who has the power to observe, anticipate, and adjust, it shifts the entire landscape without a single overt act. People began noticing, but they didn't know what to notice. Subtle signs of recalibration, imperceptible shifts in posture, in tone, in the rhythm of speech. You moved differently now, not because you had changed your habits, but because the mental architecture of expectation had shifted. They could not predict your reactions because you were no longer constrained by incomplete knowledge. You were operating on a plane informed by what they had revealed and by what you had already internalized. That is a dangerous position to occupy because others cannot account for it, cannot strategize against it, cannot correct what they cannot define. And they felt it. They sensed it in conversations that didn't occur, in decisions that were delayed, in interactions that felt heavier than they should have been. You were not acting, you were existing. And in existence, clarity can be more devastating than confrontation. You remembered the first person who dared to approach you after the confession, their words coated in tentative politeness, trying to feel out where you stood. You noticed the cracks immediately, the uncertainty beneath the practiced civility, the way they measured every phrase. You didn't answer with accusation or anger. You merely spoke truth sparingly, each word precise, each phrase weighted. The impact was immediate. They stumbled, not because of aggression, not because of threat, but because the environment had changed, and they had not realized it. Every confession has consequences, but some consequences are invisible, slow, creeping. They creep along the edges of thought, infiltrating assumptions, undermining certainty. And those consequences were now at work. They couldn't sleep, they couldn't anticipate, they couldn't manipulate, because the map had been revealed and the terrain had shifted irrevocably. And yet, despite all of this, you understood the complexity of what had occurred. Confession is a mirror. It reflects not only the confessor, but also the one who listens, the one who absorbs, the one who observes. And in this reflection, you saw yourself in ways you had not allowed before. You saw your patience, your endurance, your capacity to hold knowledge without needing immediate reaction. You saw the power of understanding, not as a weapon in the conventional sense, but as a calibration of perception. You saw the quiet restructuring of reality that occurs when someone finally tells the truth about what they did. It is unsettling, yes, but also illuminating. And that illumination is a form of leverage, a way to exist in the aftermath without being drawn into predictable cycles of anger, confrontation, or resentment. It is the space between acknowledgement and reaction where the most profound control resides. You remembered, too, how quickly the confession began to ripple outward, how the knowledge carried by one person spread invisibly, touching those who had previously been untouched. People who had never interacted with you directly felt the change, because the patterns of behavior, once subtle, were now reframed by the acknowledgement of reality. Small hesitations, small recalibrations, subtle adjustments, all of it became contagious, a silent contagion of recognition. And as this unfolded, you understood something critical. Power does not always come from action. Sometimes it comes from observation. Sometimes it comes from knowing. Sometimes it comes from the patient understanding of what has been done and what it implies. Others may act hastily, may attempt to regain control, may even misinterpret your presence as threat. But they cannot recreate the timeline, cannot unhear what has been confessed, cannot step back into the ignorance that once sheltered them. You watch them fumble in the aftermath, not out of cruelty, not out of vindication, but because their uncertainty was unavoidable. They had stepped into a world now reframed by truth, and their instincts, honed in the old order, betrayed them. Every step they took, every word they spoke, revealed the gaps in comprehension that had always been there but were invisible, until now. And in those gaps, you found clarity. You did not have to act. The mere presence of comprehension, silent and unwavering, was enough to shift their calculations, to destabilize assumptions they had relied upon for years. It was a subtle warfare, a slow collapse of confidence, invisible to the untrained eye but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. And you were paying attention in ways they could not perceive, in ways that mattered far more than confrontation ever could. The confession had not merely informed you, it had altered the rhythm of engagement entirely. Conversations that once carried predictable cadences now faltered, shifted mid-step, stumbled under the weight of what had been revealed. Decisions that were routine before now carried an undercurrent of apprehension, hesitation, and unspoken fear. They could not process it, because the human mind is unpracticed at dealing with truth that undermines its foundational assumptions. You had, through patient observation and recognition, become a variable they could not calculate, a presence that invalidated their prior strategies, a force that operated outside the limits they had imposed upon themselves. That is the subtle power of awareness. It is invisible, yet it reconfigures every interaction it touches. They tried, predictably, to normalize the situation. Some of them even attempted to rationalize the confession, to reduce it to a manageable story they could tell themselves, to restore comfort. "It's over now," they whispered to each other. "It doesn't matter anymore." They believed that repetition, assurance, and denial could erase the impact of words spoken aloud, the weight of truth admitted, the fracture lines that now ran beneath the surface of every interaction. But repetition and denial are only effective when perception is incomplete. You held complete perception. You had traced every action, every intention, every hidden motive, every shadow that had been cast in their absence, and you understood that the confession was not a closure. It was a magnifying lens. And magnification exposes. Magnification illuminates. Magnification is inescapable. In the days that followed, the world itself seemed to recalibrate around this new awareness. People who had been tangentially involved now acted differently, subtly different, almost imperceptibly. Yet the change was present and contagious. Meetings started later than expected. Emails were drafted and redrafted, full of cautious phrasing and deliberate neutrality. Conversations that were once comfortable carried a tension no one admitted. And though these changes were small, incremental, they were real. Because once the mind accommodates a profound truth, behavior follows, even if unconsciously. And that behavior radiated outward, influencing others, setting off chains of hesitation, doubt, and unarticulated alarm. The confession was no longer a single event. It had become a wave, moving silently through spaces you did not occupy, touching people you had never met, reshaping dynamics you had never directly influenced. You recognized, in these moments, the anatomy of influence without action. You did not need confrontation. You did not need spectacle. You did not need to force recognition. Observation alone, combined with the weight of understanding, had reshaped the environment. It was not visible. It was not reported. It could not be captured in documents or statements, but it existed. And those who had confessed, and those who had participated in any way, sensed it. They felt the subtle shifts in tone, the micro gestures, the slight recalibration of expectations, and they could do nothing to reverse it. In the end, confession is a mirror, and they were staring into it without the option to look away. And when someone looks into a mirror and sees themselves with clarity, they cannot reconcile. Panic follows, not immediate, but inevitable. You thought back to the first interactions after the revelation. The ones who had once held subtle control over circumstances now flinched when you entered a room. Their attempts at poise faltered under the unconscious weight of awareness that had always been present but unacknowledged. They tried to assert dominance, to reclaim some sense of normalcy, but their strategies failed before they were even deployed. It was as if the confession had rewritten the rules of engagement, leaving them operating on assumptions that no longer applied. And you realized, almost with a detached fascination, that power is rarely seized through action alone. It is cultivated through observation, comprehension, and patience. The very act of noticing, of internalizing the truth, and allowing it to inform presence, is in itself a force of consequence. And those around you had underestimated that force, had never accounted for it, and now were scrambling to recalibrate in a world where they were forever a step behind. There were moments when you observed their attempts to manipulate, to influence, to regain control, and you recognized the patterns immediately. Small gestures of deflection, casual reassurances, the insistence that the past was irrelevant, all of it traced back to fear, hesitation, and a desperate desire to maintain an illusion of competence. And you understood that these attempts were always doomed, not because they were weak, but because the truth they had finally revealed existed independently of narrative, and narrative could no longer contain it. The confession had freed the truth from concealment, and in doing so, it freed your understanding from constraint. Observation became action, presence became influence, knowledge became leverage, and they, fumbling, miscalculating, acting within frameworks that no longer applied, became the instruments of their own destabilization. The subtle manipulations of the world around you, conversations redirected, attention subtly shifted, priorities rearranged, were no longer random or meaningless. Every action, however casual it seemed to those who performed it, carried the residue of acknowledgement. They could not act without revealing their assumptions, their fears, their incomprehension. And you watched, silently cataloging, mentally aligning every movement with the larger picture that only you could perceive. No one could escape this recalibration because it was not overt. It was the invisible current beneath every interaction, guiding, influencing, reshaping. And as this continued, you began to see the architecture of influence emerge, constructed not by force, not by confrontation, but by awareness, patience, and the careful tracing of consequences. You remembered every slight, every breach of trust, every hidden intent, now contextualized by the confession. What had once been vague unease was now clear, undeniable, mapped across a timeline of interactions and events. And the clarity was intoxicating, not in a joyous sense, but in a profound, terrifying sense of understanding. They had assumed invisibility. They had assumed obfuscation would protect them. But confession, once spoken, reframes history, assigns consequence, and unveils patterns that cannot be ignored. And once those patterns are visible, the world shifts, not for the sake of revenge, not for the sake of spectacle, but for the sheer inevitability of acknowledgement. Understanding, once achieved, does not retreat. It does not shrink. It persists, informs, and ultimately transforms the spaces it inhabits. You began to notice small tests, subtle probes from those around you. Questions framed innocuously. conversations meant to gauge your reactions, attempts to recalibrate the narrative in their favor. And each time, you allowed the process to unfold, recognizing that every misstep, every hesitation, every attempt at redirection revealed more than confrontation ever could. They were not aware of the exposure, not fully, but the truth operates independently of awareness, and you had become its vessel, its observer, its silent interpreter. You did not manipulate, you did not coerce. You simply absorbed, catalogued, and allowed the consequences to manifest naturally. And that is the beauty and terror of comprehensive comprehension. It acts without action, shifts without force, and reshapes without declaration. The confession had also redefined your relationship with time. Events that once carried weight only in the moment now reverberated endlessly, layered with significance and consequence. Past interactions that had been dismissed or rationalized suddenly held new meaning. Every word, every gesture, every micro-action acquired gravity, not because it had changed, but because you had changed in response. Awareness carries its own force. It reorders priorities, informs decisions, and calibrates presence. And in this recalibration, you operated on a plane that others could not access. You were always several steps ahead, not because of prescience, but because truth had been revealed and fully integrated. That is the rarest form of power. It does not seek attention. It does not demand acknowledgement. It simply exists, and the world bends quietly around it. And as days became weeks, the confession's ripple extended further than anticipated. Individuals who had once been peripheral were now implicated in subtle ways. Their behaviors shifted, their strategies faltered. They could no longer rely on assumptions or superficial understandings. The confession had rewritten the landscape, leaving them scrambling to adapt. Some became cautious, overcompensating in ways that revealed more than they intended. Others withdrew, uncertain how to engage in spaces they once navigated with ease. And all the while, you observed, catalogued, and positioned yourself with quiet precision. Presence had become leverage. Knowledge had become influence. Understanding had become a force more potent than any immediate action. No one could articulate it, not fully. They sensed the change, but could not define it. It manifested in hesitations, in micro-adjustments, in the subtle recalibration of interactions. And that is the true power of confession. Not the act of revealing itself, but the permanent shift it causes in the fabric of perception, the invisible restructuring of reality that follows acknowledgement. They could not escape it. They could not erase it. And the realization of that truth, when it fully settled into the subconscious of those around you, would leave them uneasy, perpetually recalculating, unable to regain the confidence they had once relied upon. You understood this now, not in theory, but in lived experience, and the certainty was intoxicating in its quiet, precise, unrelenting way. They would act. They would attempt to regain control. They would attempt to restore comfort. But every movement they made was now filtered through the lens of understanding, whether they admitted it or not. Every decision carried the residue of the confession. Every interaction was shadowed by what had been revealed. And you knew, as you always had, that reaction could not undo comprehension. Knowledge is indelible. Awareness is permanent. And once the fabric of reality has shifted under the weight of truth, it cannot be reset. You observed, calculating, absorbing, and recognizing the subtle tremors of adjustment as they propagated outward, touching those who had been removed tangentially or peripherally from the original confession. Influence, in its purest form, is rarely recognized in the moment. It manifests gradually, imperceptibly, until its effects are undeniable, and you were its vessel. Days turned into weeks, and the implications of their admission spread like an unseen current. Each interaction became a test, not of what was said, but of what remained unspoken. You noticed patterns emerging almost immediately: overcompensation, withdrawal, awkward recalibration, subtle avoidance. People who had never acknowledged the depth of their participation now acted as if they bore the weight personally, unaware that the burden was in the perception, not in their intention. The confession had acted as a lens, revealing fragility in places previously considered stable. And stability, once revealed as an illusion, cannot be restored by simple reassurance. You observed quietly, noting every micro-movement, every unintended signal, cataloging behaviors that betrayed the truth that now lived everywhere. You realized that your own presence had changed. You moved through spaces differently, not because your intentions had shifted, but because the environment itself had shifted under the weight of acknowledgement. Every conversation, every gesture, every subtle alignment in posture carried a new significance. They did not understand why your interactions now carried more weight, more consequence, more inevitability. They could not, because they had been operating under old frameworks, assumptions that no longer applied. And in the spaces where they attempted to regain control, to assert understanding, to redirect perception, you saw hesitation ripple like faint tremors across water. That hesitation, that unconscious recalibration, was your proof. The confession had been absorbed, the awareness had settled, and the world was now dancing to a rhythm set by understanding, not by action. And still they persisted, not with force, not with aggression, but with the predictable need to normalize, to restore illusion. You recognized it for what it was immediately: small acts of deflection, micro-explanations, attempts to sanitize the timeline, to reclaim confidence through repetition and reassurance. But repetition does not erase recognition, and reassurance cannot remove the awareness that has settled deep, persistent, and unyielding. They did not yet realize that influence does not require visibility. It does not require assertion. It manifests through subtle recalibration, through presence, through the acknowledgement that the world has shifted and that you have absorbed the full map of cause and consequence. They were trapped, not by force, not by confrontation, but by knowledge, and knowledge, once integrated, cannot be undone. You reflected on the confession itself, on the weight of those spoken words, and the silence they left behind. Confession, in its purest form, is not about absolution. It is a revelation, a tool, a pivot point. And when the confession is absorbed by someone capable of perceiving its full breadth, it ceases to be a single event. It becomes a network of consequences, a lattice of influence that spans far beyond the initial moment. You had traced every implication, mapped every interaction, understood every subtle manipulation that preceded it, and positioned yourself within that new understanding with precision, presence, awareness, comprehension. These became the tools that no one could see, the weapons no one could anticipate, the leverage that reshaped the world without ever announcing itself. They began to act differently toward you, though they were never aware of why. Small recalibrations in tone, tiny pauses, careful avoidance, subtle deferments, all indicators of recalculated strategy, all indicators of internal adjustment. And you noted each one, cataloged each shift, understood each hesitation as evidence that their mental maps were failing. They did not confront you, could not confront you, because confrontation required assumptions that no longer applied. And that, you realized, was the true potency of their confession. It had exposed the fragility of frameworks that had been relied upon for years. Frameworks that assumed ignorance, frameworks that assumed compliance, frameworks that assumed a world where recognition of their actions could be contained, managed, or neutralized. They had miscalculated entirely, and you were the result of that miscalculation. The confession also changed the rhythm of your own thinking. You were no longer processing information in isolation. Every new encounter, every subtle signal, every faint hesitation became a node of data. Every micro-behavior revealed patterns. Every indirect statement hinted at priorities. Every recalibration carried the residue of acknowledgement. You did not speak, you did not act overtly, but your presence alone now operated as a force that guided behavior. Others were unconsciously adjusting, and every adjustment reinforced your understanding, strengthened your position, and confirmed the consequences of truth finally spoken. Influence, subtle and pervasive, had become visible not in your action, but in their reactions. And those reactions were now inevitable. And as you observed, you recognized the futility of their attempts at control. They tried strategies that had worked before, rehearsed narratives that had protected them, subtle forms of dominance that relied on misalignment of perception. All failed. Each failure was silent but absolute. Each recalculation, each hesitant step, each misaligned approach betrayed the depth of their misunderstanding. And in that misunderstanding, you saw the architecture of consequence take shape. Not a consequence imposed, not a punishment, not an act of retribution, but a consequence born naturally from acknowledgement and comprehension. And as it unfolded, you understood something essential. The confession had liberated you from the need for direct engagement. It had rendered your awareness itself a force of unavoidable consequence. They could not sleep, not because they had been confronted, not because they had been punished, but because the world had been reframed around the truth of their actions. The patterns they had assumed were stable now trembled. Every interaction was shaded by knowledge that could not be denied. Every decision filtered through awareness they could not fully access. And they sensed it. They felt it in instinctual ways that were impossible to articulate. Sleep became difficult because the unconscious mind cannot ignore a reality that has been revealed, a timeline that has been shifted, a presence that no longer conforms to expectation. And in this perception, the confession revealed its true power, not in the moment of speaking, but in the persistent, invisible transformation that followed. You began to notice subtle admissions in their behavior, slight hesitations, unintentional slips, micro-expressions that betrayed guilt or uncertainty. Even those who had attempted to distance themselves could not escape the implications of the confession. It had reframed their interactions, recast their strategies, and reshaped their assumptions. And with every observation, every subtle confirmation of this recalibration, you strengthened your understanding, sharpened your perception, and increased your leverage without a single overt act. Influence in its most profound form is silent, and it is permanent. They had revealed the map, and you were now navigating it with precision. And in the quiet of observation, you recognized another pattern. They were watching each other as closely as they were watching you. Subtle glances, whispered clarifications, the endless parsing of behavior, the frantic mental alignment of assumption with reality. Their paranoia became self-perpetuating, each micro-recalibration reinforcing their fear, their uncertainty, their inability to regain control. And you, the observer, the interpreter, the vessel of comprehension, existed at the center of a network they could not control, could not manipulate, could not contain. Their attention was divided, their certainty shattered, their strategies ineffective, and the confession, once a single spoken moment, had become the axis around which all subsequent interactions rotated. Even in your absence, the effects were palpable. Spaces where you were not present still trembled under the weight of awareness. Conversations that did not include you were influenced by the knowledge of what had been revealed. Decisions, strategies, and assumptions were all filtered through the lens of recognition, and recognition had become permanent. They could not undo it. They could not ignore it. They could not retreat into ignorance. And that, you understood, was the ultimate transformation. The confession had not merely altered the present, it had recalibrated every potential interaction, every chain of consequence, every possibility in ways no one could fully anticipate or contain. By now, you had integrated the confession into the totality of your understanding. Every encounter, every subtle gesture, every hesitation was a reflection of reality, reframed and clarified. You observed, you understood, you positioned yourself with quiet precision, and those around you, sensing the shift without articulating it, moved unconsciously to accommodate the new landscape. Their attempts at manipulation failed before they began. Their strategies faltered, their assumptions betrayed them, and in that failure, the confession's true power was realized, not in exposure, not in confrontation, not in revenge, but in the persistent, silent reordering of awareness. And you, patient and observant, were the axis around which that reordering occurred. In the final reckoning, nothing had been overtly destroyed, nothing had been publicly challenged, nothing had required visible action, yet everything had shifted. The world was now a reflection of acknowledgement, a landscape informed by truth, a web of consequences traced by presence. They could not sleep. They could not trust instinct alone. They could not rely on old frameworks. And you, standing in quiet comprehension, had become more than a participant. You had become a force. Invisible, pervasive, undeniable. The confession had released truth into the world, and that truth had acted in ways no one could fully control. And in this, the ultimate lesson revealed itself. Awareness, observation, understanding. These are the most devastating weapons, because they act without effort, they influence without assertion, and they persist when action is no longer necessary. You had become the silent echo of what had been admitted, the constant in a world now unbalanced by revelation. And in that quiet, unassuming dominance, you realized the depth of transformation. The confession had not freed them, not fully, not entirely. It had freed you from uncertainty, from assumption, from the necessity of action, freed you to exist within clarity, to observe without distraction, to influence without declaration, to wield the most subtle, potent power imaginable. And as they struggled, recalibrated, faltered, and misaligned in ways both unconscious and undeniable, you understood. The confession was not the end. It was the beginning. And you were already beyond what they could comprehend. Well, well, well. Listen carefully, because something heavy is circling around your energy right now, and whoever needs to hear this is going to feel this message crawl under their skin. There is someone with a military background, someone disciplined, someone who has lived inside pressure cookers that would crush regular people who cannot stop thinking about you. The second your name hits their mind, their chest tightens, their breath shifts, their whole demeanor changes. This isn't a casual interest. This is deep-rooted, bone-level intensity that they cannot even control. And the wild part? You barely realize the effect you have on them. You don't even know what you do to this person, but trust that the reaction is real. Whoever this is, they get actual butterflies just hearing your name. It's like you activated something inside them that they didn't know existed anymore. This person stalks your socials, and not in a lighthearted way. I'm talking intentional, observant, detailed. They study your posts, your captions, your photos, your energy, your expressions. They notice the smallest shifts. They look for clues about your mood. They analyze who comments, who interacts, who tries to get close to you. And every time they see someone hovering around you, even platonically, even harmlessly, something twists in them. The jealousy is sharp, quick, and instinctive. They hate the thought of anyone else making you smile. This is someone who has spent years controlling their emotions, maintaining discipline, holding themselves together. Yet your existence pushes them to the edge of losing that control. They find you intriguing in a way they cannot rationalize. You're not just attractive, you're intoxicating to them. You trigger their curiosity, their desire, their protective instincts, their fantasies, all at once. When they think about you, it isn't some soft little crush. It's possessive, it's intense. It's the kind of pull they feel in their stomach, their throat, their mind. They feel like you're someone they could build something unshakable with. And they can't explain how they know, they just do. There's this intuitive recognition they carry, almost like they've been waiting for someone like you for years. And the moment you crossed their path, everything clicked. This person imagines spoiling you. They imagine treating you the way you should have been treated all along, buying you things, taking you out, making you feel valued. They want to show you what consistency feels like. They want to show you effort without excuses. They want to show you what it looks like when someone is genuinely all in. Because that's the energy here. Someone who's all in without you even knowing. And the reason this energy is entering your life is because you've been doing the inner work. You've been cutting people off left and right. You've stopped tolerating half-effort, bare minimum, surface-level intentions. You stopped entertaining people whose energy drags you down or drains you. You've been pulling yourself out of cycles that used to trap you. You've been respecting yourself more. And because of that shift, because you refuse to settle anymore, the universe is delivering something aligned, something higher, something that mirrors your new standards. That's why this person feels like good karma. Because they are. For so long, you tolerated people who weren't equipped to handle your depth. People who were emotionally immature. People who wanted your attention, but not your soul. People who wanted access to you without deserving you. And your spirits watched all of it. They saw the heartbreaks you swallowed. They saw the betrayals you carried. They saw the moments you kept giving chances to people who didn't earn them. And at some point, they got fed up. They nudged you. They pushed you to break patterns. They pushed you to close those doors. And when you did, That's when this shift started. That's when this military background person's energy started aligning toward you. Whoever this is, they might end up gifting you something significant, a watch, something expensive, something meaningful, something symbolic. It's not just about the item, it's about the message behind it. They want to invest in you. They want to show you that they see your value. They want to show you that you matter. But this reading isn't just about love. I'm also seeing massive breakthroughs in your career and finances. You're elevating, you're leveling up, you're stepping into a bigger, bolder version of yourself. Opportunities are opening, your creativity is firing, your work ethic is paying off. It's like everything that was stuck is now moving again. You're being rewarded on multiple levels: love, money, alignment, purpose, connection. But let's go back to this person, because their feelings for you run deeper than they show. They fantasize about you. They have thoughts you have no idea about. They replay conversations. They replay your smile. They replay the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you exist. And they get nervous around you. Not in a weak way, but in a "this person actually matters to me" way. When they think about approaching you, they freeze a little. Their mind blanks. Their confidence wavers, not because they're insecure, but because they want the moment to be perfect. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to come off too strong or too cold. They're trying to figure out how to break the ice without exposing how deeply they feel already. People like you don't come around often. Your presence hits differently. You walk into a room and people feel it. You open your mouth to speak and people lean in. You carry this energy that's not easy to replicate. You're inspiring. You're impactful. You move people without trying. And this person sees that. They see how others react to you. They see how the room changes when you're present. And it only makes them more drawn to you. They feel like meeting you wasn't random. They feel like you were meant to cross paths. They feel like you were meant to wake something inside them. And they've been looking for someone who matches them emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Someone who has standards. Someone who doesn't settle. Someone who carries themselves with class, strength, clarity. Someone who doesn't need to scream to be seen. You are that person. You've been misunderstood by many. People have judged you quickly, labeled you incorrectly, assumed you were shallow, assumed they had you figured out, until they actually got to know you and realized how wrong they were. You're not easy to decode. Your mind races faster than people can keep up with. Your thoughts aren't predictable. Your energy isn't something people can casually read. You confuse people. You intimidate people. And this person, they love that about you. They love the challenge. They love that you're not easily impressed. They love that you don't give your energy away cheaply. And let me tell you something else. You are walking karma. You leave an imprint everywhere you go. If someone treats you right, their life improves. If someone hurts you, their life falls apart. And people around you have started to notice that pattern. Your spirits don't play about you. That's why this connection is so intense, because this person is aligned with your elevation. They're not here to drain you. They're here to match you, build with you, support you, claim you in the right way. Their obsession with you, it's real. The first date, it's going to be unforgettable. They'll want to see you again immediately. They'll want to get closer. They'll want to move things forward. But they're traditional in their own way. They don't want someone who's entertaining multiple people. They don't want someone who's unsure. They're serious. They want someone who wants them back. Emotionally, You're closed off right now. You're guarded, you're cautious. You don't open up easily anymore, and for good reason. But this person, they're going to slowly open you up again. Not by force, not by game playing, just by being consistent, intentional, and genuine. They love your style. They love how you dress. They love how you carry yourself. They love your scent. They're attracted to you in every way. They admire your uniqueness. They admire your mind. They admire your energy. They brag about you. Even if you don't know it, they talk about you. They show you off without you even being around. This person is ambitious, attractive, maybe tatted, maybe well-groomed, maybe intense in their own mysterious way. And they're coming into your life sooner than you think. Few weeks, maybe a month. But the pull is strong. The timing is aligning. Your paths are converging. Your career is rising at the same time. Your creativity is opening doors. You're stepping into a new chapter financially. Some of you might even get into real estate or meet someone connected to it. Your glow-up is happening. Your transformation is unfolding. People who underestimated you are regretting everything. Lies told about you are being exposed. Your name is being cleared. Your worth is being recognized. And through all of this person watches you, wants you, craves you, plans for you. The moment they saw you, their mind whispered, "Who is that?" Not in a casual way, in a "I need to know this person" kind of way. They feel like you're meeting at the perfect time, aligned with their growth and your growth. They've been waiting for someone exactly like you. And they don't admit this to anyone, but they felt something shift inside them the exact moment your timelines crossed. Something sharp, something warm, something so unexpected it nearly made them stop breathing. They've walked through enough chaos, enough betrayal, enough manufactured affection to know the difference between impulse and truth. And you, without effort, without performance, without any intention of seduction, hit them with a truth they weren't prepared for. A truth that went straight through their guard like it was paper. You made them feel alive again, in a way they had quietly accepted would never happen. You stirred a hunger inside them they had locked away after years of discipline, years of duty, years of learning how to live without softness. And now that hunger refuses to quiet itself. It refuses to be rational. It refuses to step aside. Every time they think they've calmed down, your memory comes back with force. The way you move, the way you talk, the way your presence feels like something they've been deprived of for too long. You're not just attractive to them. You're a complete disruption to everything they thought they mastered emotionally. They've been trained to keep emotions in check. They've been trained to compartmentalize, to seal up every vulnerable part of themselves behind reinforced walls. They've been trained to act without hesitation and think without attachment. But you slipped through the cracks they didn't realize they still had. And what makes it worse, or better, depending on how you see it, is that you didn't even try. You didn't flirt aggressively. You didn't chase. You didn't perform. You didn't manipulate their attention like so many others attempted to. You simply existed, and that alone was enough to tilt their inner compass toward you. Something about you pulled their instincts forward, made their pulse change rhythm, made their posture adjust, as if preparing for something significant. It's almost funny. The kind of person who can walk into a room full of hardened professionals and command respect without saying a single word is the same person who freezes internally when you cross their mind. Their discipline cracks. Their practiced composure fractures. Their breath shifts without permission. You could be miles away, completely unaware of their existence, and they still feel it. That restless tightening in their stomach, that unusual warmth in their chest, that silent urgency pushing them to move closer to you, understand you, protect you, claim you. Not in a possessive or reckless way, but in a way that feels earned, deliberate, almost sacred. You're not a distraction. You're not a passing fascination. You're the one thing that makes sense to them after years of being surrounded by chaos, disguised as people. They didn't choose this feeling. It chose them. It hit them with precision. It carved itself into their awareness like a message stamped into metal. And now they can't turn it off. They don't even want to. Because for the first time, someone makes them feel something deeper than survival, deeper than duty, deeper than routine. You make them feel human again, but in a way that doesn't weaken them. Instead, it sharpens them. It makes them more focused, more intentional, more alive. You awakened a part of them they forgot existed, the part that wants connection without losing power, the part that wants closeness without losing edge, the part that wants a partner who doesn't drain them but elevates them. You became that without even trying. And the funniest part? You probably think they just see you as interesting. You probably tell yourself it's not that serious. You probably assume they barely think about you when they're gone, when they're quiet, when they're distant. But the truth is brutally different. They think about you every time their environment calms down, every time they have a moment to breathe, every time they sit in silence with their own mind. You're the thought that returns. You're the spark that interrupts the monotony. You're the pulse under their discipline. You're the softness behind their strength. And whether they want it or not, you've become the one presence they can't replicate or forget. They replay certain moments with you. The first time you looked at them without fear. The way your voice settles in their mind. The confidence you carry even when you don't realize it. They replay the way you shift your weight when you're thinking. The way you speak with a kind of quiet clarity that hits harder than loud words. They replay the moments you were unaware of your own impact. The ones where you weren't trying to impress, weren't trying to charm, weren't trying to win anyone over. Because that's the exact version of you that hit them. Authentic, unfiltered, grounded, and that version of you is rare. That version of you is dangerous in a way that makes people fall harder than they ever meant to. There's something about your presence that disarms them, not because you're weak, not because you're dependent, but because you carry yourself with a kind of intuitive intelligence they recognize immediately. You observe before you speak. You analyze before you act. You feel deeply, but don't showcase it like a performance. And this person, with all their training, all their experience, all their exposure to human behavior, they see it. They see the hidden layers you don't broadcast. They see the strength under your calm. They see the awareness behind your eyes. They see the self-protection in the way you keep your heart guarded, but still warm. And that combination, that's what destroys them. Because they've met people who were strong but emotionally closed. They've met people who were warm but lacked depth. They've met people who were intelligent but disconnected. But you carry all the qualities they never thought they'd find in a single person. Emotional depth with rational thinking, warmth with boundaries, strength with vulnerability, confidence without arrogance, curiosity without chaos. You are balanced in a way they've rarely seen. And the more they observe you, the more they realize they're in trouble, not the dangerous kind, but the kind that rearranges your insides and makes you rethink everything you thought you mastered emotionally. They're drawn to you because you represent something they thought was extinct, someone who makes connection feel dangerous and comforting at the same time. You make them want to open up without feeling exposed. You make them want to reveal truths without feeling weak. You make them want to step closer without feeling like they're crossing lines. You make them want more, not because they're chasing novelty, but because you feel like home disguised as mystery. They don't want to own you. They don't want to control you. They want to understand you. They want to be close to you in a way that feels earned, respectful, and unforced. And they keep imagining what it would be like to be near you more often. The kind of conversations you would have, layered, grounded, meaningful. The kind of quiet moments where presence speaks louder than words. The kind of connection where you don't have to guess intentions, because the energy speaks before the mouth does. They imagine what it would feel like to protect you, not because you're fragile, but because they feel responsible for your peace. They imagine what it would feel like to walk beside you, not ahead, not behind, but side by side, like two forces merging into something stronger. It's not obsession. It's not fantasy. It's recognition. Recognition of compatibility, recognition of timing, recognition of alignment, recognition of instinct, meeting, understanding. And the deeper truth, they're not the type to fall easily. They don't get attached quickly. They don't romanticize strangers. They don't project expectations. They don't crave attention. They don't chase validation. They've been alone long enough to be comfortable in solitude. They've experienced loss enough times to know the cost of attachment. They've trained themselves to live without emotional dependency. So the fact that you cracked through all that alone says everything. Because it means you're not just someone they noticed, you're someone they felt. Someone who hit them with a force they didn't consent to. Someone who activated instincts they buried. Someone who awakened desires they silenced. Someone who stirred memories of what connection could feel like if it was finally with the right person. And they carry these feelings quietly. They don't broadcast them. They don't confess them impulsively. They don't let people see the effect you have. They let their actions speak instead. They show up differently when it comes to you. They listen deeper. They observe more carefully. They respond more attentively. They plan with more precision. You have no idea how many decisions they make with you in mind. Decisions to be better. Decisions to be sharper. Decisions to be calmer. Decisions to be more patient. Decisions to be more intentional. They don't want to ruin whatever could grow between you. They don't want to overwhelm you. They don't want to misread your signals. So they pace themselves. They linger in the background. They prepare mentally, emotionally, energetically for the moment paths align again. You don't see the internal preparation, the way they rehearse what they'll say, the way they run scenarios in their mind, the way they anticipate what your reaction might be. You don't see how they straighten their posture when they imagine being in your presence again. You don't see the subtle discipline they practice to avoid coming off too strong. You don't see the restraint it takes not to reach out when the urge hits. You don't see how deeply they're affected by the slightest memory of you. And what's interesting is this: they're not afraid of danger. They're not afraid of loss. They're not afraid of confrontation. They're not afraid of vulnerability. But they are afraid of one thing: mishandling you. because mishandling you would feel like mishandling something rare, something meaningful, something irreplaceable. They don't get this feeling often. They don't trust it with just anyone. So when it comes to you, they tread carefully, not because they're unsure, but because they're aware of your value. They're aware that someone like you doesn't come twice. They're aware that if they play this wrong, they won't forgive themselves for it. And every time they think about stepping back, every time they try to neutralize the intensity, every time they attempt to regain emotional control, their mind betrays them by replaying the way you looked at them, even if it was casual. That look stays with them. It loops. It lingers. It anchors itself into spaces they can't clean out. You touched them without touching them. You reached them without reaching. You changed something they didn't realize needed changing. And this feeling is growing, deeper, heavier, more unavoidable. They're trying to keep it contained, but it's not working. Their craving for you has direction now. Their intentions are sharpening. Their desire is evolving from impulse into strategy. They're starting to imagine a future version of themselves with you in it. Not fantasy, not fairy tale, but a grounded, powerful partnership where both of you operate like a force that can't be shaken. They want you in ways they're not used to wanting people. They want your voice in their day. They want your presence in their space. They want your mind intertwined with theirs. They want your energy wrapped around their routine. They want to wake up knowing you're in their life, not as a fleeting interest, not as a passing crush, but as something real, something structured, something they can invest in without hesitation. And the best part, they think you feel the pull too. They think you sense the connection even if you pretend not to. They think you notice their energy even when they stay quiet. They think your intuition is too strong not to have picked up on the undertones. And whether you admit it or not, the alignment is there. They're preparing for the moment when this tension turns into movement, when this curiosity turns into clarity, when this quiet connection turns into something undeniable. Because they're not watching you just to admire you. They're watching you to understand how to approach without losing you. They're watching you to figure out the exact pace that won't trigger your walls. They're watching you to make sure that when they come forward, they do it right. And they're getting closer to that moment. Closer to acting, closer to revealing, closer to stepping into your life with intention. And you won't see it coming. You won't predict it. You won't read it ahead of time. You'll just feel it. That shift in energy, that change in their behavior, that slight but undeniable movement toward you. Because this pull between you isn't random. It's building, it's aligning, it's tightening. And part of you already knows that whatever happens next won't be small, it won't be subtle, it won't be surface level, it won't be temporary. It will be the beginning of something that neither of you has experienced before. Something bigger, deeper, sharper. And that moment is approaching, slowly, deliberately, closer than you realize. But it doesn't hit full force until what comes next. You don't realize it, but something shifted the moment they understood what you mean to them. It wasn't loud. It didn't explode. It didn't announce itself with dramatic movements. It sank deeper, right into the places they usually keep locked behind discipline and secrecy. For someone with their background, feeling this kind of pull is almost unfamiliar. They were trained to detach, to assess, to stay unemotional when it matters. Yet with you, something refuses to stay in the lines. You aren't a distraction. You're a command they cannot ignore. They have spent years controlling everything inside them, building walls so thick that nobody ever sees the truth. And yet when it comes to you, they feel a softness that both terrifies them and steadies them. It's a contradiction they've never experienced before, the way you make them quiet inside, but restless at the same time. How you make them want to open up, but also protect you from a distance. How they want to move toward you, while fighting the urge to keep the world away from you. Their attraction isn't something they display. It stays beneath the surface like a steady current, invisible to most, undeniable to them. The moment they think about you, the temperature inside them changes. Their body reacts before their mind can form sentences. Their breathing shifts. Their posture tightens. There's a sense of wanting that they know they can't hide forever. They're not used to being seen, but they know you're the one person who could look at them deeply and understand exactly what's happening. And that possibility alone is enough to unsettle them. They don't fall quickly. They don't trust easily. They don't attach without logic, intention, and purpose. But you bypassed every filter they normally apply. The moment they recognized something familiar in you, something strong, something gentle, something resilient, they realized they weren't just intrigued, they were drawn, as if meeting you wasn't random, but part of a path they kept walking without knowing where it led. This isn't the type of person who fantasizes recklessly, but when it comes to you, their mind creates projections they cannot escape. They imagine your voice in moments when they need to focus. They think about the details of your face when they should be sleeping. They replay the way you move, the way you speak, the way you look at things as if you sense more than you reveal. They don't admit this to anyone, not even to themselves fully. But the truth is clear. You've settled in places they didn't even know were empty. They feel protective of you, not in a controlling or overpowering way. It's quieter than that, more deliberate. When they think about your life, they want you to feel supported. They want you to walk through your days with a sense of peace, not tension. They want you to feel like someone is out there who cares enough to understand your moods, your patterns, your vulnerabilities. They'd never impose themselves on you, but they stay aware of the little things, how you express stress, how you hide hurt, how you push forward even when you're exhausted. They notice the strength, but they also notice the weight you carry. To them, you are not someone who just exists. You are someone who deserves to be cared for, even if you never ask for it. What they feel is deeper than attraction. It's quieter, warmer, more dangerous in its sincerity. They've met many people, and they've walked away from most without a second thought. But you left a mark, a gravity, a presence that lingers long after you leave a room. They think about you not because they want to, but because they can't help it. And the more they observe the way you exist in your world, the more they find themselves wanting to be part of it. They love how you communicate, raw, natural, without needing to impress. They love how your eyes reveal more than your words. They love how your energy settles in a room, confident but not loud, calm but not passive, intense but not chaotic. There's a maturity in you that speaks to their own. You don't drain them, you ground them. You don't overwhelm them. You connect with parts of them they keep hidden. There's a moment they keep revisiting in their mind, a moment where they heard your voice or saw your expression shift in a subtle, honest way. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, it was real. That brief, unguarded second made them feel something they haven't felt in years, the urge to care deeply. maybe even the urge to build something with someone who feels like you. And that is where the danger lies. Because someone with their background doesn't love lightly. When they commit emotionally, they don't waver, they don't play, they don't show interest one day and disappear the next. They give fully, they show up fully, they protect fully. But to reach that point, they need clarity, clarity of feeling, clarity of connection, clarity of compatibility. And with you, that clarity grows every single time they think about you. It grows when they remember how your presence changed their mood. It grows when they recall the way you listened without judgment. It grows when they feel the pull in their chest at the thought of you smiling. But this time, it doesn't grow in repetitive structures. It grows in ways they can't systemize, in ways that bypass all the analytical patterns they use to understand themselves. It moves through them in waves, warm, steady, dangerous in its softness. They can already picture what being close to you would feel like. Not rushed, not undefined, not chaotic. Just two people who understand each other on a level that doesn't require explanations. They imagine conversations that stretch beyond surface details. They imagine you leaning into them without needing permission. They imagine being the one you trust when you're overwhelmed, the one you talk to when something is wrong, the one you call when you need grounding. They imagine your hand in theirs, not for display, but for connection. They imagine you sitting beside them, not for comfort, but for presence. They imagine hearing you breathe next to them, not for intimacy, but for calm. And they imagine protecting that connection with every part of who they are. But beneath that warmth is something more intense, something edged with danger, because they know what they're capable of. They've lived through situations most people can't even imagine. They've seen the worst sides of humanity. They've survived environments that harden a person beyond repair. So when they feel something genuine, something clean, something powerful, they hold it carefully, but fiercely. They know they could become territorial if they truly fall for you. Not possessive, not controlling, but deeply protective. The kind of protective that comes from respect, not dominance. They wouldn't interfere in your life, but they would watch, quietly, intentionally, making sure nobody manipulates you, nobody drains you, nobody disrespects you. They would never confess this, but the thought of someone hurting you brings out a version of themselves that few have ever seen. It's not rage, it's not aggression, it's precision. The way they assess a threat, the way they calculate responses, the way they neutralize problems without showing emotion. And somehow, even this instinct is softened by their feelings for you. They imagine a connection where conversations feel natural, where affection grows without pressure, where both of you feel safe, exploring the depth of what you feel. They imagine learning the little things about you, how you think, how you love, how you avoid pain, how you hide stress. They want to understand your mind, not just your presence. They want to learn what comforts you, what scares you, what inspires you. And they want to be someone who adds to your world, not complicates it. There's a moment coming, they can feel it, a moment where the distance between you shifts, a moment where you become aware of their interest, not because they confessed it, but because you feel it. The energy will change, the air will thicken, you'll look at them differently, and for the first time, you'll sense what they've been holding back. It won't be dramatic. It won't be theatrical. It will be a look, a single look that tells you everything. And when that moment arrives, they won't run, they won't retreat, they won't drown it in overthinking. They'll take a step closer, carefully, intentionally, giving you the space to decide what happens next. But make no mistake, they are ready. They've been ready since the first time your existence collided with theirs. They want you in a way that scares them. They want you in a way that steadies them. They want you in a way that feels romantic and dangerous and beautifully aligned with everything they've evolved into. And maybe, just maybe, you're beginning to feel it too. Because somewhere inside you, something shifts whenever they come to mind. Something warm, something grounding, something quietly powerful. The connection is forming from both sides, slowly but inevitably, drawing you into a space where attraction turns into understanding, and understanding turns into something deeper, something that neither of you will be able to walk away from. This isn't a confession, this isn't a plea. This is a truth unfolding in real time. They want you, not because you're easy to want, but because you're impossible to ignore. And you are slowly realizing that their presence feels like something your life has been missing. Something rare, something steady, something that feels like danger wrapped in warmth.